Hey everyone, welcome back to Silent Screams, where we dive into the darkest, creepiest, and most terrifying stories out there. Today, I've got something that'll make you think twice about your next camping trip, especially if you're a fan of the Boy Scouts. So, get comfortable, if you can, because this story is going to drag you deep into the woods where things are waiting, things that aren't human. I remember that summer vividly. I was 15, and it was my third year at Boy Scout camp. By then, I had heard all the campfire stories, ghosts, creatures in the woods, strange lights at night, but none of them ever scared me. They were just stories, right? Me and my friends laughed them off every time. But that year, things were different. That year, I learned that some of those stories were real. Camp Rookwood was tucked far into the woods, miles away from the nearest town. It was isolated, but that was part of the appeal. It gave us this sense of adventure, like we were truly out in the wilderness, far from the rules of the world. But it also meant that if something went wrong, no one was coming to help anytime soon. The first couple of days were normal. We hiked, set up camp, did all the usual Boy Scout stuff. The woods around us were dense, but beautiful. At night, the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. We were comfortable, safe, even bored at times. Then things started to change. But I still think about it. Every time I hear a strange noise in the night, every time I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I think about what could have happened if that zipper had opened just a little further. If that hand had reached just a little deeper. And I wonder, what else is out there in the dark, waiting? And that's where I'm going to leave you for now. If you're enjoying these true horror stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stick around for more. I'm not sure about you, but I don't think I'll be camping again anytime soon, especially not in the woods. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. My body wouldn't move, my voice wouldn't come. I just lay there, staring at the entrance as the zipper crept lower and lower. Finally, it stopped, just a few inches open, and I saw it. A hand, no, not a hand. Something else. Something clawed, covered in rough, matted fur, reaching through the opening. My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away, but I could still hear it. The sound of its breath, low and ragged, like it was sniffing the air, searching for me. I don't know how long I stayed like that, too terrified to move. But eventually, the zipper slid back up, and the thing outside moved away. I heard its footsteps retreat into the woods, growing fainter and fainter until they were gone. The next morning, I told the others what had happened. At first, they didn't believe me, but when we checked the tent, we found the claw marks. Deep, jagged slashes in the fabric, right where the creature had tried to get in. That was enough to convince them. We packed up camp and left that day, cutting the trip short. No one spoke about what had happened, not on the way back, not even after we returned home. It was like some unspoken agreement, like we all knew that whatever had happened out there, we were better off not talking about it. I strained my eyes, trying to see past the firelight, but the darkness was impenetrable. My heart raced as the sound grew louder, the snapping of branches, the rustling of leaves. It was coming for us. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The woods fell silent again, the only sound the crackling of the fire. We sat there, frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. For what felt like hours, we stayed by the fire, too afraid to move. But nothing came. Eventually, one by one, the guys started drifting off to their tents, leaving me and a couple of others by the fire. I didn't want to go to sleep. I didn't want to be alone in my tent again, with that thing, whatever it was, out there. But I couldn't stay up forever. Reluctantly, I made my way back to my tent, every shadow in the trees making my skin crawl. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the sounds of the forest, waiting for the footsteps to return. And they did. At first, they were distant, faint, but they grew louder, closer, until they were right outside my tent again. The same slow, deliberate steps, the same feeling of being watched. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible, but this time it was different. This time, the footsteps didn't just circle my tent, they stopped. Right at the entrance. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Then, slowly, the zipper of my tent began to slide down. "Let's keep moving," our scout leader said, his voice tense. He didn't like it either. We hiked for another hour before turning back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I thought I saw something moving between the trees. A shadow, slipping through the underbrush, too fast to be anything normal. But whenever I tried to focus on it, it was gone. That night, things got worse. We were sitting around the campfire again, trying to act normal, but there was this tension in the air that none of us could ignore. The woods around us were quiet, too quiet. Even the crickets had stopped, leaving nothing but the crackling of the fire and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A long, low howl echoing through the trees. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more guttural, almost like a scream. We all froze, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, our hearts pounding in unison. "What the hell was that?" one of the guys whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," our scout leader replied, his face pale. "But whatever it is, we're staying by the fire tonight." We huddled closer together, the warmth of the flames doing little to calm the rising fear in our chests. The howl came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving through the underbrush. Minutes passed, or maybe it was just seconds, I couldn't tell. Time didn't feel real in that moment. But eventually, the breathing faded and the footsteps started up again, slowly moving away from the tent. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked the guys if anyone had been walking around. They all shook their heads, looking confused. "Maybe it was a deer," one of them said, but I wasn't so sure. Deer didn't walk like that. Deer didn't breathe like that. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't leave me. The woods felt different now, darker somehow, more hostile. It was like something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Later that day, we went on a hike deep into the forest, further than we had ever gone before. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, and the silence oppressive. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our footsteps crunching on the forest floor. About halfway through, we found something strange. In the middle of a clearing, there was this massive tree, ancient and gnarled, its bark twisted like it had been burned. But the weirdest part was the claw marks. Deep, jagged grooves slashed into the wood, like something had tried to tear the tree apart. "Bear," one of the guys suggested, but I wasn't so sure. The marks were too high up, too precise. It looked like something big, something with claws longer than my hand, had done this. We all stood there, staring at the tree, unsure of what to make of it. It was a few nights in. We had just finished our campfire, telling scary stories, of course, and were heading back to our tents. I remember standing there, staring into the darkness of the woods beyond the firelight, and feeling weird. Like the air itself was heavy. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my stomach twisted, but I had no idea why. I figured I was just spooked by the stories we'd been telling. That night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. At first, I thought it was one of the guys heading to the bathroom. But the steps were too slow, too deliberate. They didn't sound like someone walking with a purpose, they sounded like someone creeping, trying not to be heard. I sat up, my heart thudding in my chest, straining to listen. The footsteps circled our tent, crunching softly in the dirt and leaves. I held my breath, waiting for whoever it was to go away, but the steps just kept going, round and round. Then they stopped. Right behind my tent. I could hear the faintest sound of breathing, slow and steady, like whoever, or whatever, was standing right outside, listening for movement. I wanted to call out, to wake someone up, but something stopped me. Something deep inside me screamed not to make a sound, not to let it know I was awake. So I stayed quiet, barely daring to breathe, as the thing outside stood there, its presence heavy and oppressive.